This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. A baseball bombshell. Inside and outside a courtroom today, reports of the strongest evidence yet linking Cincinnati Reds manager Pete Rose to charges of betting on baseball and betting on his team. As Frank Courier reports, this latest lightning storm broke as Rose pushed to postpone his judgment day.
For the first time ever today, Major League Baseball openly asserted what others have been saying for weeks.
9 witnesses, in one way or another, give information about Pete Rose betting on baseball or the Reds.
There is evidence, substantial and heavily corroborated evidence, that Mr. Rose bet large sums of money on Major League Baseball games and on games of the Cincinnati Reds.
Rose lawyers took baseball to court today in a lawsuit aimed at delaying Monday's showdown hearing with the baseball commissioner to answer allegations that Rose bet big on baseball.
The very foundation of a fair hearing is missing when you have a decision maker who has already judged.
The hearing was shadowed by a new storm cloud, published reports directly linking Rose to baseball bets. The FBI, federal sources say, has original betting sheets with Rose's fingerprints on them and bets on the Reds in his own handwriting. Baseball's chief investigator John Dowd told the court he confronted Rose with the betting sheets.
I told him that an experienced handwriting expert had reported to me that was his handwriting on the betting sheet.
I wouldn't know a betting sheet from a tree, and I hadn't seen anything like this, and Mr. Rose had no idea what this stuff was.
Pitt Cairn and others in the Rose camp say John Dowd's 225-page report on Rose is neither balanced nor objective.
This is the best way I can characterize it. It is a prosecutor's brief.
While Dowd disagrees, he says he understands why Pete Rose does not like the report.
Do I like it? No. There isn't a day that I haven't felt enormous sadness.
After Dowd is cross-examined tomorrow, the judge must consider if the lawsuit merits a delay in deciding who should rule on Rose and when. But even a victory in this courtroom battle is not necessarily a win for Pete Rose when measured against his losses in today's courtroom avalanche of damning evidence. Frank Courier, CBS News, Cincinnati.
Big Supreme Court victory for the government today in its battle against drug traffickers and racketeers. In a split decision, the justices upheld a law aimed at preventing criminals from using their illegal earnings to hire defense attorneys. CBS News law correspondent Rita Braver has our report.
The Supreme Court today said that criminal defendants, such as drug dealer Christopher Reckmeyer, may be forced to forfeit property and money they need to pay their lawyers. Federal law allows prosecutors at time of arrest to confiscate all proceeds from alleged drug dealing or other major organized criminal activity. If the defendant is convicted, the government gets to keep the money. But Reckmeyer, as well as many other accused criminals and their lawyers, argued that attorneys' fees should be exempt from seizure. Today, the Supreme Court said no. In a 5-4 opinion by Justice Byron White, the court's conservative majority found that in enacting the forfeiture law, Congress decided to give force to the old adage that crime does not pay. We find no evidence that Congress intended to modify that nostrum to read, crime does not pay except for attorney's fees. And the court rejected claims that by forcing the accused to rely on less expensive counsel or public defenders, the law violates defendants' constitutional rights.
They have a right to counsel under the 6th Amendment to the Constitution. That right to counsel is preserved here. What they merely lose is the right to go first class.
But the court's liberal wing, in an opinion by Justice Harry Blackmun, responded, it is unseemly and unjust for the government to beggar those it prosecutes in order to disable their defense at trial.
This literally is punishment before trial, which prevents the fair trial and makes it more likely that the person is found guilty, which then justifies the seizure in the first place.
And the court minority predicted that forfeiture laws could be expanded to cover new categories of crimes, thus threatening the American tradition of private defense counsel. Rita Braver, CBS News at the Supreme Court.
President Bush came to New York today to talk up his national volunteer program to deal with America's social problems. As White House correspondent Leslie Stahl reports, the president got an emotional look inside the world of drug abuse from young people who have lived its horrors and know its causes.
How many of the kids here have lived on the street for more than 3 or 4 years?
More.
It isn't every day that runaway teenagers, former crack addicts, get to tell the President of the United States about life on the street, about selling drugs and stealing and prostitution.
All I know how to do is sell the drug. That's all I know how to do.
Yeah.
I'm 18 going on 19. I never had a job a day in my life.
Your brother got killed? He got shot in his heart with a .44 Magnum.
And people are ignoring the fact that they're not only 18, 19 years old on the street, they're little bitty kids this tall out there on the street, too.
It isn't every day a president hears cries for help from people who know the dark side of life in America.
It's hard to get good jobs that pay. Working at McDonald's, minimum wage, you can't get anything from that.
We're funding every country that's got problems, except when you look down in the streets, there's all kids like us everywhere, and they're funding every place else.
Little 10-year-olds and everything, they see what everybody else is doing. They say, well, my friend has a car, he knows all the ladies, and he has money all the time, and he's always partying. I want to do that.
This is Covenant House in New York City, a shelter for runaway and abandoned children, a place where they can find hope.
So what do you want to be now?
What I want to be now?
What do you want to do? What do you want to be? Got any hope?
Yeah, I want a good job so I can get a house, a dog, a rabbit, a bird, and a baby.
Today, after hearing from these kids, President Bush proposed using volunteers to help deal with drug abuse and homelessness, getting people involved in community service. He calls it his Points of Light initiative. Dan?
Thank you, Leslie. Still to come on the CBS Evening News, our China report, Ray Brady on the crisis of quality in American manufacturing, and Bruce Morton on finding the German battleship Bismarck and perhaps changing history. And a government spokesman said it was futile for the United States or any other foreign country to try to interfere. Once again, President Bush had no comment. But demands are growing for a stronger U.S. reaction. John Shade in Beijing begins our China report.
The 7 protesters executed in Beijing today were accused of hitting soldiers, capturing military equipment, and setting fire to trucks as the Chinese army shot its way toward Tiananmen Square nearly 3 weeks ago. Their deaths bring to 27 the number of people China has executed in 2 days in defiance of international appeals for clemency. China's Minister of Foreign Economic Relations and Trade said he thinks the executions of 3 men in Shanghai are good for business because the condemned had disrupted rail traffic in an important commercial area.
I think it helps. We hate those people who destroy the transportation facilities.
The 3 were put to death yesterday, charged with burning a train after it plowed into a crowd of protesters, killing 6. Foreign Trade Minister Zheng Tubin is the first high official to respond to foreign criticism of the mounting executions.
Products for exports could not be shipped in the harbor for several days. The reason is that those people destroyed the railway lines.
According to the minister, the protests that followed the Tiananmen massacre also interfered with the shipment of livestock to Hong Kong. Pressure on China from outside, said Zheng, is short-sighted and not sensible.
Even those countries without death penalty, they would impose the most serious punishment.
Zheng said that everything is back to normal and that American businessmen should now return. But under martial law, anyone who goes to his ministry to talk business will have to pass military guards with fixed bayonets. John Sheehan, CBS News, Beijing.
From Vice President Quayle, the administration's toughest yet condemnation of China's crackdown.
The American people are shocked and outraged by the recent executions in China. We urge the government in China in the strongest possible terms to end the executions now.
Then a warning that both sides will lose if the U.S.-China relationship is allowed to deteriorate.
Chinese leadership must judge where its strategic and economic interests lie. We urge the Chinese leadership to consider the effects of what they have done and what they are doing.
For President Bush, who has yet to speak out on the executions, a challenge from the Senate Majority Leader.
I urge the President to assume the proper role as spokesman for the American people, as leader of the free world, condemn these actions.
White House officials traveling with Mr. Bush in New York snapped back in a written statement. The president has spoken out quite well. No one in the world can doubt our position. There is no need to repeat our reaction every day. Members of the House scrambled to vote 416 to nothing to condemn the executions and call for clemency.
We beseech the people who are in the government of China to stop the executions.
Chinese activists in Washington to appeal to the Congress quoted unconfirmed reports that this man, whose determined courage was burned into the world's memory, has also been executed. Testifying before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Secretary of State Baker had a final word for the Chinese leadership.
While they may be able to clear the square, they won't be able to clear their conscience.
But they will still be able to clear their checks. Baker also made it plain that the administration plans no new sanctions. That means trade will continue, despite calls from Congress for an end to most favored nation trading status for China. Bill Plant, CBS News, the State Department.
African leaders have reportedly worked out a ceasefire in the 14-year-old civil war in Angola. 18 heads of state attended a one-day summit today in Zaire, along with the U.S.-backed Angolan rebel leader, Jonas Savimbi. The Soviet Union promised friendly cooperation with Iran today, including military aid. Mikhail Gorbachev and Iran's parliament speaker, Hashemi Rafsanjani, signed the declaration in Moscow. It said the Soviets were ready to help in strengthening Iran's defense capacity. It also promised a broad range of cultural contacts, including an exchange of religious leaders that could give a boost to the Islamic revival among the Soviet Union's estimated 50 million Muslims. American nun is in a hospital in El Salvador tonight with a gunshot wound in the head. 72-year-old Sister Mary Stanislaus Mackey runs a home for orphans of the Salvadoran Civil War. She was riding in a car last night when a man in a pickup truck fired a single bullet through the window. The attacker escaped. The motive is not known. In 1980, 4 American church women were raped and murdered by members of the Salvadoran National Guard in a case that led to a suspension of U.S. aid to El Salvador. In West Texas, along the Mexican border, a heat wave has been bearing down for a week and there's no relief in sight. The temperature is 100 degrees plus on both shores of the Rio Grande, El Paso in Texas and Juarez in Mexico. But as Scott Pelley reports, the effects of the heat are far worse on the Mexican side.
He has no name and may not live to be christened. In the pediatric ward of Juarez General Hospital, heat is killing the children.
Right now it's about 104.
How can you work in this heat?
We have to. It's a necessity.
The air conditioning is broken. There is no money to fix it. Juarez General is an example of a growing medical crisis on the U.S. border. Mexican medical facilities are overrun by a booming population. Juarez has more than 1 million residents, but a fraction of the health care budget of neighboring El Paso.
They have twice our population, 1/8 of our budget in terms of real dollars. Well, they live in a world of hurt.
The world of the border changed quickly with the growth of new factories. The unemployed are drawn from throughout Mexico, often living in colonias, squalid boom towns for the poor, where a home is scratched from the earth. The colonias compound the hospital crisis because these are areas without sanitation, running water, or electricity. At Juarez General, the number of infant patients has doubled since last year, but the hospital budget has not increased in a decade.
It's a battleground, and in the battleground you have to do what you can.
The battle for the boy with no name continues against the assault of the heat. Already this month, 7 infants have died of dehydration. With no money for hospital expansion, the children of northern Mexico are likely to suffer through many summers to come. Scott Pelley, CBS News, Juarez, Mexico.
In Washington today, the Senate approved a Democratic-backed child care program that would provide low-income parents with subsidies and tax credits. A White House-endorsed Republican alternative based largely on tax relief was rejected. Next up, Senate debate over proposed amendments. The House begins work on its own child care bill next week. He said the gross national product grew at a 4.4% annual rate in the year's first quarter. That's slightly better than previously believed, but the Commerce Department noted better than half the growth in the GNP reflected a rebound from last summer's drought, more a result of accounting methods than a measure of the economy. There is no sadder fact of economic life than the loss of American leadership in the international marketplace. Quality, a word once linked to Made in America, is now all too often associated with foreign products. CBS News business correspondent Ray Brady looks tonight at government and industry efforts to win back the consumer confidence American commerce once took for granted.
Hit it.
Like this? Doesn't break.
World's only transistor portable in a non-breakable impact case. Guaranteed 5 years.
It didn't break because it carried the proud label, Made in the USA. A label so respected for quality that Americans hardly ever bought anything else.
About 2.5% of all cars sold last year were imported.
But that was 1958. Last year, 30% of all cars sold in the U.S. were imports. And this year, while American car sales are falling, Japanese car sales keep rising. One reason, a perceived difference in quality.
The car had no emergency brake when it was bought. I wasn't told that. I had to find that out for myself. I'm disappointed now. I would prefer that I had kept a foreign-made car, which I've had experienced little problems with.
I think U.S. manufacturing of automobiles is lousy.
So more and more, consumers now feel that label, Made in the USA, means problems.
We just bought it. If you wait a second, I'll be gladly to take it back there and find out what the situation is here.
Shoddy products, poor service. American industry, in fact, is facing a crisis in quality.
American consumers are beginning to ask themselves, am I getting my money's worth?
It gets aggravating after a while when you go back for the same thing over and over and over and over for the same problem.
If we don't change the way we do things, eventually it'll be that we consume nothing that is made here in the United States.
Some economists think American consumers and manufacturers forgot about quality around the time of the soaring 60s. Then the motto was, if it doesn't work, throw it away. Buy another one.
Robert Galvin, chairman of Motorola.
Trying to improve U.S. products and win consumers back, Washington last year began offering annual quality awards to American companies. One winner, Motorola. It's the only U.S. company still making beepers. It even exports them to Japan. So Motorola understands the need for quality. Economists say most U.S. companies still don't. Only 3 won quality awards last year. This year, only 44 even entered the competition.
How many companies are fanatically obsessed with making sure that every single customer is satisfied?
How many?
Maybe 0.5%?
And that's the problem. Until that percentage rises, U.S. goods will keep losing out in the minds of consumers.
Let me explain to you. Assembled in the USA of Japanese and U.S. components. I think that's what's wrong, probably. If it was assembled in Japan, I don't think we'd have these kind of problems.
Ray Brady, CBS News, New York.
Has tantalized naval historians since World War II. Did the British sink the Nazi battleship Bismarck in fierce battle, or did the Germans scuttle the ship? The answer seemed buried in the Bismarck's watery grave. But earlier this month, a scientist discovered and videotaped the wreckage. Today, he made public those pictures and his opinions. Bruce Morton reports.
She was the pride of the Nazi Navy, the mightiest ship afloat.
She began her maiden voyage in 1941 when Britain stood alone and German ships and submarines were savaging Allied convoys. In her first engagement, Bismarck took just 3 minutes to sink HMS Hood, the flagship of the Royal Navy.
HMS Hood, largest warship in the British fleet and pride of the British Navy, has been sunk by the German battleship Bismarck.
A furious Winston Churchill ordered, "Sink the Bismarck."
I was surprised that we found it sitting upright proudly on the bottom and in one piece.
Ballard and his team found the Bismarck 600 miles off the coast of France using the same robot submarine, the Argo, which he used to find the Titanic 4 years ago. The wood of the deck is still in good shape, the pictures show. You can see where British shells hit the armor plating and where the gun turrets used to be. They fell out as she sank. Ballard thinks the Germans scuttled her.
The judgment was made by the commanding officer of the ship to literally sink the ship. Why proceed? We're just taking hundreds of hits and it's over.
The British have always believed they sank her. They had chased her for days. These elderly biplanes got to her first, a torpedo which crippled her steering mechanism. Surface ships followed, gunfire, then more torpedoes. The camera couldn't see where they hit.
Because where those torpedoes came in on the port and starboard side of the ship would be below the mud line.
The Germans tried to scuttle her. The British tried to sink her. We may never know exactly what happened.
Well, as we say, in the military, there's the fuzz of battle. And I'm sure that was very fuzzy right about then.
They caught Bismarck and they prevented her getting home, and she finished her first voyage, her maiden voyage, on the bottom of the sea. And that is all the Royal Navy was concerned about.
Good news for Churchill, too.
The sinking of it came at the right moment for Churchill, because he was not really in trouble, but the war had gone badly for him.
So she lies quiet now. Ballard and his team have no plans, they say, to disturb her. She lived for less than 2 years and has lain here for almost 50. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Washington.
And that's the CBS Evening News. We hope you'll stay tuned to this station for an updated look at the abortion issue before the Supreme Court. That's on 48 Hours, tonight at 8, 7 Central. So stick here with us. Dan Rather. See you again soon.
Battle. One side crying murder, the other crying freedom, and tough choices for those caught in the middle. 48 Hours tonight.
This is CBS.
We do realize